Still infertile, huh? Pathetic. My daughter's a stunner and a genius. Truly a pitiful middle-aged woman. You've lost all your charm as a woman. I never imagined they'd chased me down just to say these things. I'm appalled by Mike and his friend's childish thoughts. I quietly finished my coffee without responding. Mike chose his mistress over me. I'm astounded by their absurdity since our reunion. It's regrettable to think I was married to such a person. The real victims here are the kids. How should I get back at these two crazies? They deserve to suffer more than I did. My name is Jane, 45 years old. Mike was a year senior at the company we joined as new employees. He was so competent, I initially thought he had more experience. Our department was close-knit with regular social gatherings. At one such event, I ended up sitting next to Mike, and we started talking more. I quickly fell for Mike, who was kind and proficient. One day, Mike asked me out for a meal, just the two of us. He felt the same way, and on the way home from dinner, he asked me out. Naturally, I accepted, and our relationship began. Everything went smoothly, and a year flew by without major arguments. On our 1-year anniversary, Mike proposed, and we decided to marry. I was 23, just a year into the job, when Mike said, "Jane, I want you to stay home." So I resigned. Early married life was fun. I wanted to be with Mike forever. Then, cohabitation started. Initially, love overshadowed his faults. Mike's parents pressured us for grandchildren. Mike agreed, saying the sooner the better, so we started trying for a baby. Initially, we didn't consult a doctor, thinking it would happen eventually, but it wasn't so simple, and the pressure from the in-laws grew. "Mike and Jane are young. Try a bit harder. We want to see our grandchild soon." They'd say this almost daily, and I began to feel cornered. Susan, Mike's mom, only spoke to me about this, so Mike was unaware of the pressure. I read an article saying stress is bad, so I talked to Mike about Susan. "Mom? I haven't heard anything. Are you sure it's not just in your head? That's what's stressing you out." "Mike, maybe you haven't heard, but I get calls every day. It's really tough. Could you talk to Susan?" "All right, I'll try." The day after this conversation, Susan called. Thinking Mike had spoken to her and expecting an apology, I answered. "Did you complain to Mike? Nasty woman. Just have the grandchild and get divorced. If you can't even have a baby, leave." She ranted like this for 2 hours. Fed up with Susan's attitude, I suggested to Mike we should see a doctor. But he was reluctant and said, "Why don't you go alone, Jane? The issue is usually with the woman, right?" "It's not my problem. We've been trying for a year and a half. It's better you go." He refused to even entertain the possibility it could be him. Resigned, I went to the doctor alone. The test showed I was normal. I showed the results to Mike when he got home from work and asked him to get tested too. Mike said, "Then what could it be? It's definitely not me." He said this even though he hadn't even tested it. I told Susan about it, but the test results must be wrong. "I got pregnant with Mike right away," she said with another snide remark. And from that day, Mike started coming home late more often. I spent 6 months visiting the hospital repeatedly. I couldn't dare discuss with my parents or friends that our second year of marriage had come to this. Pressured by the in-laws, Mike blamed me for our situation. I bore these troubles alone in my daily life. When I felt I was reaching my limit, I talked to my regular doctor. "So that's what's been happening. It's tough, isn't it? Trying to conceive is a couple's issue. Do you think it's difficult for Mike to come in for a test too?" I was at a loss for words. Seeing my distress, fertility issues can take over 3 years for some couples. Don't rush it. The doctor encouraged me. I could only say I'd discuss it with Mike and waited for him to come home to tell him. Then Mike revealed the shocking truth. "It turns out it was Jane's fault after all. I can have kids, so we're getting a divorce." "Can have kids? Divorce?" My mind was in a panic. I demanded an explanation from Mike. "There was this super cute girl at a party, and I've been dating her. Jane couldn't get pregnant, and Mom suggested I switch women, and guess what? She got pregnant in just 6 months. Maybe we're just a better match." "That's cheating. We've only been married 2 years. I've been dealing with the infertility and Susan's nagging all alone. Technically, it's cheating, but isn't it Jane's fault for not getting pregnant? But poor Jane. I'll give you a compensation. Thanks for all the pointless effort. And so, Mike and I divorced. As compensation, I received his entire savings of $20,000, but it left me feeling empty. On the day I moved out, Mike had his new girlfriend over, as if timed with my departure. She was flashy and 6 years younger than Mike. Her name was Emma, and as I was leaving, she looked me over and said, "Too bad for you. Sorry for stealing your beloved. We'll be happy together, the three of us." Emma's words pierced my heart. I held back tears and rushed out to my parents' house. This incident led me to a breakdown, and my parents suggested mental care at a clinic they knew. 16 years have passed since then. I now live a very happy life. I arrived early for a meeting today and sat on a nearby bench to kill time. As I reached into my bag for a book, a man stopped in front of me. Looking up, I was shocked to see Mike. "Is that Jane? What a coincidence meeting you here." "Why are you here?" "I recently moved to this town. Never thought I'd run into you here." As Mike mentioned, I had moved far away to avoid any chance encounter with him. Yet here he was, unexpectedly, in front of me. I left without saying a word. I didn't want to talk to Mike. I went into the cafe where I was meeting someone and sipped my coffee to calm down. Then, someone tapped my shoulder. Turning around, I saw Mike, Emma, and a teenage girl, apparently named Katie. Whether they followed me or it was a coincidence, I didn't know. Mike said to Emma, "I knew she'd be here." They must have seen me enter the cafe. When I asked what they wanted, Mike and Emma spitefully said, "Still infertile, huh? Pathetic. Our daughter is a knockout and a genius. Truly a pitiful middle-aged woman. You've lost all your charm as a woman." I never imagined they'd follow me just to say that. Appalled by Mike and his friend's childishness, I silently finished my coffee. Unable to respond, they laughed loudly. Their daughter was busy with her phone, indifferent. Just then, my meeting person arrived. "Sorry, I'm late. Rollo was slow in getting ready." "It wasn't Dad, it was you." "Wait, who are these people?" Approaching were my current husband and daughter. In fact, I remarried 9 years ago and have a daughter. My new husband, Ben, was the doctor who took care of me when I was mentally unwell right after my divorce. Our daughter, Rala, is in the 9th grade. Ben asked me out once my condition stabilized, saying he wanted to support me going forward. We dated for about 4 years, and it was Rala, then 7 years old, who asked Ben to become her dad, which led us to marry. I decided to get back at Mike and his group. "I'll introduce you to my 9th grade daughter, too." That girl? I've seen her before." Mike and his friends started searching something on their mobile phones. Then they looked back and forth between the phone and Rala. "Isn't that Rala, the model? I've been a fan. She's stylish and excels in her studies. But why is Rala here?" "She's my daughter. She was scouted on our way back from a high school orientation. She's beautiful, you know. We're about to have a family dinner. Can you leave now?" Mike and his friends didn't seem to want to leave. I didn't want to argue in front of Rala in the cafe. I was wondering what to do. "Seriously, this is embarrassing. Please let's go." Thanks to Kate saying that, Mike and his friends, who looked like they wanted to say more, reluctantly left the cafe. At dinner, Ben asked, "That was your ex-husband?" I told him about the chance encounter before coming to the cafe, that they followed me into the cafe and mocked me. Ben suggested we move again. Rala also said she wouldn't mind changing schools. But since we had to explain the situation to Ben's workplace, moving would have to wait a bit. About 3 weeks later, I was doing housework as usual when the doorbell rang. Thinking it was a delivery, I checked the monitor and saw Mike standing there. Wondering how he knew where I lived, I didn't want to face him and pretended not to be home. Watching the monitor, I felt scared seeing Mike just standing there, not leaving. Then he put something like a paper in the mailbox and left. I hesitantly checked it and found a mobile phone number. Below it was written, "Contact me, otherwise it'll be another unexpected visit." Chilled to the bone. I quickly called Ben and told him about what happened and the note's content. "Let's call him together when I'm off the day after tomorrow. We need to find out how he got the address. Then we'll go to the police." But Mike could come again before that. The next day, feeling scared to be alone, I asked a close mom friend to come over. Mike didn't show up during that time. On Ben's day off, we called Mike from his mobile phone. He picked up after a few rings and we put it on speakerphone. I started recording on my phone. Jane, so happy you called. I wanted to ask you something, so I went to your house. Were you not home? First, answer my question. How did you know where I live? Easy. I hired a detective. Told them my girlfriend wouldn't give me her address, and they believed it and found you. But I was surprised. Jane married a doctor. After money, huh? According to Mike, he lied about having a girlfriend who wouldn't give her address, and the detective agency found out where I lived. That's how he learned my husband was a psychiatrist. Shocked this was even possible, I asked why he hired a detective. I figured since your daughter's in 9th grade, she must have been conceived 16 years ago, right? Thought maybe... Yes, she's your child. I found out after we divorced. I knew it. I thought so. My daughter now is stylish and a genius, but she can't compare to the famous Rolla. I couldn't understand how he could say such things about the daughter he was so proud of. I told him not to come to my house again and to leave us alone. What are you talking about? You and Rolla are destined to be mine. I'll come to pick you up tomorrow. Be at home, okay? Otherwise, who knows what'll happen. Is that a threat? It's not a threat. If you could have kids, I would have taken you back. Mom and everyone would have been happy. Why didn't you tell me? I was told that, but at the time I was emotionally unstable myself. Finding out I was pregnant brought happiness, but I feared that telling him would lead to him asking me to come back, and tears involuntarily spilled. Day after day, I resolved to raise the child alone. I didn't tell Mike because I thought returning to him would only lead to more pain. I said, and Mike seemed irritated, his tone growing harsher. Painful life? What was so painful? Are you saying it was my fault or Mom's? Always blaming others and running away. Get real. Just divorce and come back and bring Rolla too. Got it? He said and abruptly hung up. So I went to the police with the recording. They assured me they'd patrol the area tomorrow, which gave me some relief. Ben spoke to his workplace and took the next day off as well. But that night, Mike called Ben. It seemed like both Mike and Emma were on the line, their voices audible. I recorded the call for safety and answered the phone. I have a proposition about our talk this afternoon. Is your husband there? He's here. What's this proposition? Well, it'll be quick then. Jane and Rolla will come to me, so Jane's current husband and Emma will be lonely, right? So I thought Jane's husband could take care of Emma and her family. I couldn't understand what Mike was trying to say. Emma seemed content with marrying a wealthy man. Ben and I couldn't follow their nonsensical conversation and exchanged puzzled looks. When we said we had no intention of divorcing and didn't want any further contact with Mike, Emma raised her voice. Wait! Don't joke! Your husband will obviously prefer me. I'm younger and more beautiful. I even quit my part-time job at the store because I heard I could marry a high-income guy. That's your choice, isn't it? You return to Mike and I become the wife of a rich man. Perfect, right? What's the problem? You're so selfish. Mike's words made no sense, nor did Emma's. The ones being unreasonable seemed to be them. Besides, Ben would never fall for Emma. She had grown 3 times larger since I first saw her with rough skin. Thick foundation, bright red lipstick, and overpowering perfume. Far from Ben's taste. And her greedy character only worsened her appeal. There is probably no man in this world who would fall in love with a woman like that, let alone Ben. As we were dumbfounded, a loud voice came from the phone. Enough! It's embarrassing for adults to behave like this. How much more trouble will you cause others? I've had enough. It seemed Kate was yelling at Mike and Emma. Despite being raised by such parents, Kate turned out well. I'm going to Grandma's. Can't live with you anymore. I called as soon as I heard you on the phone. Child services and the police will be here soon. I've decided to cut ties with you. At 16, Kate was old enough to express her wishes. Mike and Emma, flustered by her words, neglected our call, so we hung up. That night, Mike and Emma showed up at our house. Open up. Kate's gone, so we can live with you now. Let's live together, the 3 of us. Me, Jane, and Rolla. She's way better than a rebellious daughter. Ben, let's have fun together. Open up. I can still have children. They banged on the door, pressing the doorbell repeatedly, shouting these things. Ben and I went to the door, but didn't open it. Ben replied, Stop it. I'm not leaving Jane. And Rolla is indeed our child. Now, we called the police as soon as you arrived. But Mike and Emma didn't leave, thinking it was a bluff. Kate was quite a girl, but Rolla is even better. Her chest is bigger too. I could even just take Rolla if you want. How can you see your daughter like that? I said it because she's a woman. Women are women, right? What I do with mine is my business. What's wrong with that? Mike's words were chilling. He seemed to see Rolla as a woman. Emma, too, was more interested in getting money from Rolla than confronting Mike's statements. I felt a deep disdain for such hopeless people, but as they continued causing a scene at the door, I worried about disturbing the neighbors. Just then the police arrived. They looked surprised and tried to escape, tangling each other's feet, but were caught. I just came to pick up my daughter. I've done nothing to be arrested for. I haven't done anything either. Just came to pick up my prince. Let go of me. They desperately tried to escape, but the police held firm. Mike became enraged and shoved one of the officers, leading to their arrest for obstructing public duties. I was relieved Rolla wasn't there to witness this. Seeing such a scene could have traumatized her. A week later, Kate visited us. She found our address from a note Mike had left and apologized at the door, so we invited her in for coffee. She tearfully revealed her past. Kate had suffered mild abuse from Mike, and Emma turned a blind eye, neglecting her. She hardly had proper meals, surviving on a single sweet bun most days. School lunches helped until middle school, and she spent weekends at her grandmother's. Emma's parents were strict and disapproved of Mike and Emma, but adored Kate, allowing her to visit. Kate had never spoken about her mistreatment, and revealed that Emma's parents had been funding her education. Mike's behavior escalated in high school, and when she couldn't bear it anymore, she contacted the police and child services after overhearing their loud call to us. Emma's parents offered her a home, saying she should live with them. I'm sorry for the trouble my parents caused. I've always admired Rolla and wanted to apologize. Sorry for showing up unannounced. You're a victim too. No need to apologize. It must have been hard. Kate smiled. I'll be fine from now on, saying, we chatted and learned Rolla would attend the same high school as Kate. Let's get along. I tell you, I gave her my contact information and she left in the evening. That night, I told Ben and Rolla about Kate's visit. Rolla said, I'm looking forward to the new school. We continued preparing for the move. The move and Rolla's school transfer went smoothly. Kate later informed us that Mike and Emma were sentenced to prison. They had committed theft and nuisance behaviors with several charges emerging. They wouldn't be out for years. And with substantial debts, they couldn't lead a normal life. Emma's parents disowned them, and Mike's parents, who adored Kate but never financially helped, were also estranged. Mike's parents were heartbroken at losing contact with their granddaughter. Since then, we've led a peaceful life. Kate became much happier and closer to Rolla, often staying over during weekends. We maintained a good relationship with Emma's parents. Infertility is a delicate issue. Assumptions can be hurtful. Like me, many are pressured and end up mentally distressed. So Mike, Emma, and his parents were responsible for their actions. I hope for a peaceful life for our family from now on.
You're useless and don't work. I want a divorce. Where had the kind and charmingly smiling Neil from our courtship days gone? I've been transferred. It's a nationwide bank, so I don't know when I'll be able to return here. That's why I want you to come with me. I had quit my longtime job to follow him, but honestly, there's no point in staying with this person anymore. Fine by me. Relieved to finally be divorced, I bought a lottery ticket and incredibly won a large sum. I've come to claim my $12 million prize. Just as I was about to reclaim a happy life with my $12 million, my ex-husband Neil caught wind of it. I saw right through Neil's intentions. I couldn't forgive his plans to take the money for himself, disregarding others. I was tired of being belittled by him, so I decided to fight back. I'm Mariah, a 35-year-old housewife. Since graduating high school, I had worked for about 10 years as a City Hall employee. I thought I'd retire there without much happening. Life changed when I met my husband, Neil. We met at a restaurant near the City Hall. It's a sizable place with a vast menu, popular for meals after meetings or completing significant tasks. That day, having finished chairing a meeting, I decided to treat myself to a nice lunch there alone. What's recommended here? A man stood in front of the restaurant, perplexed by the menu. With its extensive options and colorful displays inside, it's common to see people deliberating over their choices. I was drawn to this man, indecisively tracing his finger over the popular recommended and manager special signs. Normally, I'd walk past, but I found myself speaking to him. If you're here, I recommend the chicken Neapolitan. It's deliciously sweet and spicy. Chicken Neapolitan? Is that on the menu? Yes, the mix of chicken and Neapolitan ketchup is really tasty. Then I guess I'll try that. His smile when he said that was so charming, I was captivated. At first, he seemed like a capable businessman, but his smile had a boyish quality. That keychain. Oh, this? Got into it because of my sister. Just went to their concert recently. The one just the other day? I was there too. It was amazing, right? We hit it off over our shared love for the artist and unexpectedly ended up having lunch together. Familiar with the restaurant and it being lunchtime, our short conversation was enjoyable. I felt a sense of fulfillment. Not enough even for a lunch break. It seemed Neil felt the same way as he approached me when leaving. If you don't mind, I'd like to see you again. Could we exchange contact information? Living my usual life in the usual place, I never expected such a dramatic turn of events. Could something like this really happen outside of a drama? Despite my doubts, we exchanged numbers. I wanted to talk more, and it was exciting to share such enthusiasm with someone. Afterward, we started going out for meals and attending events together. Our relationship naturally progressed, leading to dating and eventually marriage. We got married when I was 33 and Neil was 34. I wanted to cherish the happiness of being with Neil, but life doesn't always go as planned. Mariah, I need to talk to you. Neil came home with a troubled look. What's wrong? Come on, let's eat. I've been transferred. I had to tell you as soon as possible. I couldn't wrap my head around it suddenly. Transferred? What do you mean? They said with my promotion, I should go see the world outside, and I can't really refuse. Though surprised, part of me understood. After all, Neil was a banker. His bank has branches all over, so I knew transfers were part of the job. I had braced myself for this, but Neil's words and expression concerned me. Would a normal transfer make him look so down? Wait, what do you mean by the outside world? Is there something hard to tell? Actually, I'm being transferred to Boston. They want me to train at a branch there. What? Boston so suddenly? I knew that as a banker, Neil might have to relocate, but Boston of all places? We lived in a provincial city, so Boston was quite a distance away. We had discussed what we'd do if you were transferred before we got married. I had expressed my preference for him to go alone if that happened. But now, Neil was suggesting we break that promise. Please, Mariah, I want you to come with me. Wait, I have my job here too. I fully understand it's hard, but I can't bear to be apart from you. You want me to quit my job and move to Boston? We might return here in a few years. What about going to Boston alone till then? Neil hesitantly responded. I thought about that, but our bank has branches nationwide, so there's no guarantee we'll come back here. This is so sudden. Being transferred to Boston means I'm on the fast track to success. It'll make things easier for you, Mariah. Neil then pleaded with his hands clasped as if in prayer. I know it's a lot to ask you to quit your job suddenly, but I hate the idea of going alone. I'll work desperately hard on this career path, so please, come with me. I couldn't refuse after such a plea. Honestly, the thought of Neil transferring alone and how it would affect our lives worried me. We had discussed wanting children soon, so living apart seemed impractical. All right, I'll go with you, Neil, but you have to work hard, okay? Thank you. I'll do my best. I'll become a branch manager and make life easier for you, Mariah. I wish I could have told myself back then. I I wish I could tell myself then not to go with him on the transfer. In Boston, Neil seemed like he had changed. He became a work-first person, or perhaps it was mostly the loss of his smile that made him seem different. "Welcome home. Ready for dinner?"
"Huh? Can't you see how tired I am? No way I can eat."
He would go straight to the bedroom, looking as if he might collapse, his face expressionless. Mornings came too early for him, and days without a morning greeting continued. "Neil, you look pale. Are you okay?" I hadn't seen his smile in a long time. We barely ate together, and he usually came home after midnight. Although I heard weekends were generally free, he was hardly ever at home. Even when home, he'd stay in the bedroom shut away. It felt like living alone. I started to wonder about the point of quitting my job to follow him to Boston. Maybe I should have insisted on him going alone. But no matter how much I regret it, there's nothing I can do. I need to find something to do for myself. Just passing the days aimlessly would be such a waste. Then one day, I got an idea when I saw a flyer in the mailbox. If I'm going to be at home all the time, I might as well start working. So I applied for a job at a nearby cafe that was hiring. Fortunately, I got the job right away. Having only done office work before, everything about this job was new and exciting to me. And above all, seeing the customer smiles up close was delightful. The cafe where I worked is known for its latte art, and people come from all around to see the owner's creations. I thought how fun it would be if I could make such beautiful latte art myself. Working at this cafe in Boston, I found a new joy. In my free time, I learned latte art from the manager, spending fulfilling days. Gradually, I started thinking about how nice it would be to do something professionally with latte art. It was around this time that I began to ponder starting my own business. I dreamt of how fun it would be to have my own shop and spread the joy of latte art. These fantasies were my escape from the growing disconnect with Neil. Gradually, this escapism turned into a solid goal, and I started researching what it would take to own my own shop. But that wasn't all. Maybe I should try my luck. Around this time, I started buying lottery tickets. Working at the cafe was fun every day, and I earned my own money. I thought everything was great, but Neil didn't seem to think so. One day, while I was practicing latte art on my day off, Neil spoke to me in a bad mood.
"Hey, what's with you lately, Mariah?"
"What do you mean? Is something wrong?"
"No, it's just, you're always playing around, neglecting the housework. There's dust everywhere, and you haven't prepared meals."
Of course, I did what I needed to do before going to work part-time or practicing latte art. I used to make breakfast and dinner for Neil, but he often came home late at night and skipped dinner. Lately, he would leave for work without eating breakfast, so I stopped preparing it. "Neil, you hardly eat at home these days."
"That's not the point, is it? Are you just making excuses because you don't want to do it?"
He never used to speak so oppressively. Since moving to Boston, he seemed like a changed person.
"And what's with the cafe and latte art? Isn't it embarrassing as a banker's wife? And you talk about wanting kids, but you don't even cook proper meals. Isn't that failing as a wife?"
I was actually visiting the doctor between part-time hours, but it turns out there's nothing wrong with me. I don't appreciate being accused of running off to play. And about the child, the doctor said there was nothing wrong with me and asked to see you next time. When can you go, Neil? Then Neil suddenly shouted and raised his hand.
"What? Are you saying it's my fault?"
I didn't say that. The doctor just asked when you could come in for a check.
"I've told you, I'm busy with work. It's not like you playing with coffee. Don't lump us together."
I couldn't believe Neil would say such things. Where had the Neil who used to smile gone? Since coming to Boston, he really had changed.
"I feel sick. I'm going to work."
Wait, isn't today your day off? And it's already evening.
"There's something I need to finish. It's none of your business."
He left, but he didn't look like he was going to work. He was in casual clothes and sprayed cologne 2 or 3 times before leaving. Wait, do you always wear cologne? My casual question was met with a glare from Neil. His frequent rushes out of the house, mood swings, and taking it out on me were becoming too much. Honestly, I wanted to build a good relationship with Neil. Living in an unfamiliar place, he's my only family, so I want to support and help each other. But I realized Neil's view of me had drastically changed. I wanted to have a proper conversation about it. If he's unhappy with me, I want to fix it. Hey, can we talk for a minute?
That's good timing. I have something to say, too.
I wondered what he wanted to talk about. With that thought, I sat down on the living room chair. When was the last time Neil and I sat face to face in these chairs? Lately, it feels like we haven't even looked at each other properly. So, what did you want to talk about?
Don't you already know?
What do you mean?
You're so oblivious. That's why you can't get a decent job.
I decided to overlook Neil's comments about me for now, but I couldn't tolerate his belittling the job I loved. Whatever job you have, it's wrong to mock someone else's work, especially if they love it. I had resisted moving to a new place for Neil's transfer, but here I found a passion for latte art and a dream to base my life around it. Neil carelessly trampled on that dream. I wanted to own a shop and make latte art my profession. I couldn't stay silent when my first self-discovered dream was ridiculed.
What? Work? Calling that playtime a job is more embarrassing. It's just like playing house, not real work.
Enough. What do you want to say? Then Neil, with a laugh, put a green paper in front of me.
The useless, jobless one gets a divorce.
He handed me divorce papers. Divorce papers?
Yes, you're just living off me without working. Remember your place, compared to mine.
So that's the kind of person you are.
I'm too busy with work to support a parasite like you.
What? Did he think I would beg not to divorce? I stood there, holding the divorce papers. My silence while holding the divorce papers must be disappointing to him. He became increasingly irritated.
Of course you don't want to write. A high school grad like you can't work properly outside, can you?
What should I do with this?
Hurry up. Your slowness is just like a woman who can't work.
He seemed desperate to get divorced as soon as possible. Neil, filled with impatience, started fidgeting nervously. While tapping his foot, he glared at me as if urging me to hurry. This man was no longer the Neil I had once loved so dearly. Why did I fall for someone like this? And why did I come so far away with him, to a place where I knew no one? Now I only have regrets. The one thing I needed to do was clear. Faced with Neil's provocative attitude, I responded brightly. Okay.
Really? Remember, you can't change your mind later.
I won't. You're the one who brought these papers because you wanted a divorce, right? I'm tired of living every day trying to gauge Neil's mood. I signed the divorce papers with a smile and told Neil, I'll file these papers myself.
You better do it. I'll know if you do anything strange.
Stop it. If I say I'll do it, I will. Don't worry. After filing the divorce papers and finally being free, I decided to check my lottery ticket to see what the future held. I went to the familiar lottery kiosk, chatted with the lady at the counter, and handed her my ticket. She scanned it and suddenly let out a strange sound, disappearing from view. She had fallen off her chair in shock. I was startled at first, but then I saw an unbelievable number on the small display, along with the words, "Congratulations."
What? $12 million?
I was so shocked I couldn't speak. This was a promising restart. With this amount of money, my dream of owning my shop was now within reach. I went to the bank where my ex-husband worked to cash it in. There was no particular intention in choosing that bank. It just so happened that the bank where he worked was nearby. I never expected that visiting this bank would significantly change my situation. I rushed to the bank just before closing time to cash in my lottery ticket, feeling nervous about holding on to it for too long. As I was waiting after checking in, a woman approached me. "Why are you here? What brings you to a place like this?" Her tone was unexpectedly rude. "Well, it's not any really specific business." "Why did you even bother coming here?" "Why do you keep saying bother? Just please take care of this." What's this?" She looked curiously at the lottery ticket in my hand. "I came to cash it in." "Cash in? You bought a lottery ticket with your husband's money? How extravagant." The bank was crowded, so it's likely no one else heard the woman's rude words unless they were very close. People passed by without a second glance. It was unbelievable that such a rude employee existed, but I decided to quickly finish my business and leave. "I'm here to claim my $12 million. Her relaxed demeanor instantly changed to one of intense scrutiny. $12 million? Her loud exclamation startled me. Then, without a word, she disappeared into a back room. I was taken to the manager's office due to the significant amount of the prize. The procedure to collect the $12 million went smoothly, but I couldn't stop thinking about that extremely rude bank employee. Her disdainful look made me feel uncomfortable. As soon as I got home, I opened my laptop. Neil's Bank, through a national chain, had a blog for each branch detailing daily events and promotions. I was sure I could find something about that rude employee. Browsing the blog, I discovered her name. With her name known, the situation was in my hands. While I was researching the woman on the blog, I received a message. It was from Neil, asking if we could meet tonight. Honestly, after filing for divorce and considering him a stranger now, I saw no need to meet, but I decided to oblige. Neil's pride must have made contacting me a humiliating ordeal. His message was full of condescension, saying things like, "I thought you'd be lonely, so I'll meet you." Or, "I figured you'd had enough of living alone." I was furious inside, but wanted to settle things, so I agreed to meet at a cafe. When we met outside, Neil immediately started talking upon seeing me. "Hey, shouldn't we give it another try? I've been thinking a lot since then." "Give it another try?" "Yeah, I was angry back then, and said things I didn't mean." "So you want to start over with me?" Looking at me, Neil continued. "Yes, we've had our misunderstandings, but I believe we can still become a great couple." Watching Neil, clearly intoxicated with his own words, I decided to settle this. "If you insist, maybe we could give it another try." That's the Mariah I know. "Did you really think I'd say that?" Neil looked at me shocked, so I decided to enlighten him. "I'm glad we're divorced. You wanted to reconcile for the money, right?" "Money? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. You thought about keeping it all for yourself, didn't you?" Neil leaned forward across the table, pleading. "No, of course not. And $12 million is a lot of money, perfect for buying a house and starting anew." "I never mentioned $12 million, did I?" Neil finally realized his mistake and covered his mouth, but it was too late. He had already let it slip, and covering his mouth in a panic, couldn't undo what had been said. "You had an affair, found your wife bothersome, so you decided to divorce, and now you want to remarry for money? Don't make me laugh." "No, it's not the money, it's just that—" "Do you even realize what you're doing and saying?" Neil was visibly uncomfortable and restless. "So you heard it from that woman, Rebecca, right?" "What? What are you talking about?" "I know you two are dating. You thought if we got back together, you could buy Rebecca even more gifts, right?" Despite the cold season, Neil was sweating. "Did you really think you could fool me with such a trivial excuse?" I showed Neil the photo I was holding. "I thought something was odd when I visited the bank. Then this very rude woman approached me. I found her distasteful, but she turned out to be your girlfriend. The photo I was holding was of Neil and Rebecca standing together. They didn't look like mere colleagues, but rather like a couple standing close to each other. To claim they were just workplace acquaintances would be quite a stretch. If he was trying to pass off that implausibility, he really needed to think again. I work at a cafe that turns into a bar at night, and I was surprised to see you two on a date there. I heard about it from the owner and colleagues, but I couldn't believe it.
Well,
I asked the owner, and apparently, you two have been coming there occasionally for about 2 years. My hand holding the photo was trembling. I had only worked part-time during the day, waiting for your return, but you were cheating and planning to leave me for the younger, beautiful Rebecca, weren't you? Neil had no response, looking down. But then, I won the lottery, and you changed your mind, right? He looked at me guiltily. So you thought if you withdrew the divorce, you could squeeze money out of me as your husband?
That's right. Money is a shared marital asset, right? I've been living with you for years, so if we got back together, it would still be shared property.
Wait, are you serious? I sighed at Neil's words. How could he have the nerve to propose reconciliation after he was the one who initiated the divorce? Sure, I have the lottery ticket, and I won a substantial amount, but I bought it after we filed for divorce.
What? What does that mean? Be clear.
It means it's not the subject to property distribution. I've already checked with the lawyer. Neil looked at me with a resentful expression. You can't be serious. You initiate the divorce, and when I come into a significant amount of money, you think we can just get back together?
I never said that.
But that's the reality, right? I heard it. I operated my mobile phone. What played was a recording. From the background noise, I could hear Neil and Rebecca's conversation. They talked about my $12 million win, and how getting the money before divorcing would make buying a house a reality. The woman's excited voice in the conversation was notable.
This is from when you were talking at the bar. How did you get this?
I was recording a video, and your conversation accidentally got recorded. So you were planning to take my $12 million win and enjoy it with your mistress, right?
Because it's not fair for you alone to be so lucky. You just play around at the cafe and then get a fortune? And you can't forgive me for 1 or 2 affairs? From my point of view, it's you who's out of line, always playing around.
I couldn't understand how my part-time job and Neil's affairs could be compared, but I decided to settle this matter once and for all. All I wanted to say was about that fact. This branch? It had some colleagues who attended our wedding, right? The world is really small.
So, what if a colleague was there? What does it have to do with you?
I showed them the video because they wanted to see it. They're interested in flair bartending. Oh, and by the way, the video includes your conversation. Then, Neil stood up from his chair with a loud noise. He stood up so abruptly that the chair toppled over, making a loud crashing sound.
Hey, what are you thinking showing that to a colleague?
They wanted to see it, so why not?
What are you doing to me?
Holding his head, Neil crouched down. It was understandable. One of Neil's colleagues, who attended our wedding, was rumored to become a manager. Being noticed by this colleague meant getting off the promotion track.
All my efforts, up to this point, and to be discovered by that guy of all people.
You thought it would be fine, as long as it wasn't discovered, right? Neil ended up far off the promotion track, now relegated to a teller dealing with shredding duties. Overtaken by his juniors and regarded as a nuisance at the bank. But that was their own responsibility. They chose the path that led them here, so they should accept the consequences. Rebecca was called by her boss and told that resignation was her only option. Rebecca reportedly insisted, I really don't want to resign. But once her affair was exposed so publicly, she had no choice but to resign. Eventually, she resigned. Rebecca, it seems, was the kind of person who couldn't do her job well. She couldn't understand instructions. did sloppy work, and essentially couldn't do anything, resulting in her not getting any job offers, even though she was registered with the temp agency. After the divorce, it seemed they blamed each other. I continued to practice latte art and decided to go independent. I was unsure about starting my own business, but the cafe owner was very helpful with various consultations. Thanks to the owner's kindness, I was able to open a new cafe. I had been doing administrative work at City Hall since high school graduation. However, following the transfer and discovering the fascinating work of latte art was a stroke of luck. If Neil had gone on his transfer alone, I likely would have never encountered latte art. There were certain nights at first, but thanks to word of mouth and magazine features, the cafe did well. I never dreamed of owning my own shop, so it's true that you never know what life will bring. That's what makes life interesting. Being able to enrich my days with something I love is truly fulfilling. Such modest happiness brings me great joy.
My words catching in my throat. Telling her felt like admitting a defeat, an acceptance that we were somehow less than those who judged us. But Lorraine deserved to know. She had always been my fortress, my unwavering support. They looked down on us, Mom, I managed to say, the dam breaking as I recounted the evening's events. Each word felt like a weight lifted, yet the shame and anger only grew stronger. Lorraine's face hardened, her eyes sparking with a fire that I knew all too well. It was the same fire she wielded to build a life for us from scratch, the same determination that drove her to succeed against all odds. Their arrogance will be their downfall, she said quietly, more to herself than to me. I looked up, surprised. What do you mean? She closed her laptop, her gaze meeting mine. I won't let them belittle my daughter, our life, without consequence. If they think their wealth and status put them above us, they're wrong. But how? I asked, a part of me fearing the repercussions. Lorraine's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Their world revolves around reputation, connections. Well, they just severed a connection with someone more influential than they realize. I was taken aback. My mother, for all her strength, had always operated quietly, her successes never flaunted. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the power she truly wielded, a power born not of wealth, but of respect and hard-earned influence. Over the next few days, Lorraine set her plan into motion. She had always been meticulous, every decision calculated. This was no different. I watched as she made calls, her voice firm and authoritative. I didn't know the details of her business dealings, but I understood enough. She was severing ties with Charles's bank, a move that would send ripples through their elite circles. It's not just about hurting them, she explained to me one evening. It's about showing that we, too, hold power. The power of integrity, of standing up against those who think they can trample on others without consequence. Her actions spoke louder than any words of consolation could. In her resolve, I found my own strength reigniting. We might not have had their wealth, but we had something far more potent, dignity and the courage to defend it. As the days passed, the impact of Lorraine's decision began to surface. Rumors swirled, the once solid reputation of Charles's bank starting to waver. I didn't take joy in their misfortune, but there was a sense of vindication in seeing that even the mighty could be shaken. In that period of turmoil, Ethan reached out multiple times, his messages a mix of apologies and pleas for understanding. I read them, each word a reminder of his silence when it mattered. I couldn't bring myself to respond. The Ethan I thought I knew had vanished that night, replaced by a stranger bound by his parents' archaic values. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. In the face of adversity, true colors are revealed, and sometimes those colors are a stark contrast to what we believed them to be. The fallout from my mother's decisive action against Charles's bank was more rapid and impactful than I had anticipated. Within days, the once unshakable institution was the subject of hushed conversations and speculative glances in the circles that once revered it. Lorraine's influence, subtle yet formidable, had struck a chord in the very foundation of their elitist world. Ethan's attempts to reach out became more frantic, his messages a mix of confusion, desperation, and thinly veiled accusations. But it was a call from Meredith that brought the reality of the situation to a head. "Alina, you must convince your mother to reconsider her decision." Meredith's voice was tense, a far cry from the poised demeanor she had displayed at the dinner. "Why would I do that, Mrs. Harwood?" I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Because you're ruining us, she blurted out, the veneer of sophistication crumbling. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our reputation? To Charles's career? Her words, meant to intimidate, only served to highlight the depth of their entitlement. Your reputation was built on looking down on people like us, I said calmly. If it's being ruined, it's by your own actions, not my mother's. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Meredith grappling with the reality of her situation. This is petty revenge, Alina. Is this what you want? It's not about revenge, I responded. It's about respect, something you and your family clearly lack. Meredith's next words were a hiss, venom coated in fear. You'll regret this. We'll make sure of it. The call ended with a click, leaving a silence that echoed with the threat. I sat there, phone in hand, a sense of foreboding washing over me. They were cornered, and cornered animals were dangerous. That evening, I recounted the conversation to Lorraine. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. They're scared, she finally said. Scared people make mistakes, but we won't. We'll stand our ground. Her confidence was a beacon in the murky waters of this battle we had inadvertently started. What if they retaliate, I asked, the worry evident in my voice. Lorraine's gaze was unwavering. Then we'll be ready. We've faced challenges before, Alina. This is just another hurdle. We're stronger than their threats. Over the next few days, the tension was palpable. Ethan's family was losing its grip on the pedestal they had placed themselves on. Rumors of financial instability and potential legal troubles began to circulate, further tarnishing the Harwood name. Then came the news that Charles had been forced to step down from his position at the bank. The details were murky, but the implications were clear. Lorraine's actions had set off a chain reaction that had led to his downfall. Despite the vindication, I felt no joy in their suffering. But there was a sense of justice, of karma playing out its hand. They had underestimated the strength of a single mother and her daughter, and now they were paying the price. As I lay in bed that night, the events of the past few weeks replaying in my mind, I realized that this was more than just a clash of social standings. It was a lesson in dignity, in the power of standing up for oneself against the tide of arrogance and entitlement. And as the dawn crept through my curtains, casting a soft glow in my room, I felt a sense of peace. The battle might not be over, but we had shown that we were not to be underestimated. The park was quiet, with only the gentle rustling of leaves breaking the silence. I sat on a bench, waiting. Ethan had asked me to meet him here, saying it was urgent. Despite my reluctance, curiosity, and a lingering concern had brought me here. Ethan arrived, his parents, Meredith and Charles, in tow. Their faces were a mix of anxiety and something that resembled fear. The sight of them, so different from the haughty figures at the dinner, was jarring. Alina, thank you for coming, Ethan began, his voice strained. My father, he's been suspended from the bank. The board is investigating the lost contracts and our family is under scrutiny. This is because of your mother's actions, isn't it? I looked at him, the man I had loved, now a picture of desperation. Ethan, my mother acted in response to how your family treated me. You were there. You heard what your parents said. Meredith stepped forward, her usual composure gone. Alina, we understand we may have been harsh, but surely this retaliation is excessive. Charles's career, our reputation. It's all falling apart. I felt a surge of anger. Harsh? You humiliated me, judged my mother and me for things beyond our control. You made us feel unworthy, and now you want sympathy? Charles spoke up, his voice edged with panic. Alina, please. If your mother could just retract her decision, or at least speak to the board, it would help clear my name. The audacity of their request left me speechless. They stood before me, not with apologies for their prejudice, but begging for relief from the consequences of their own actions. My mother did what she felt was right, I said firmly. She took a stand against people who looked down on us. The fallout from that is not our responsibility. But Alina, think about what this means for us, for our family. Ethan implored, desperation creeping into his voice. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth I had been denying. Ethan was a product of his environment, molded by the same prejudices and entitlement as his parents. This isn't just about your family, Ethan. It's about respect, about recognizing the worth of every individual, regardless of their background, I said. My mother taught me that, something your family clearly doesn't understand. The conversation went in circles, their pleas and justifications falling on deaf ears. I had heard enough. Standing up, I faced them with a resolve strengthened by the trials they had put me through. I hope this situation gives you a chance to reflect on your actions and attitudes. Goodbye, Ethan. With that, I walked away. leaving behind the world that Ethan and his family represented. As I walked, the weight of the encounter hung heavy on my heart. But there was also a sense of liberation. I had stood up for myself and my mother against the prejudices that had sought to diminish us. It was a painful yet necessary step in reclaiming our dignity. The news of Charles Sterling's suspension from the bank and the subsequent investigation into his conduct became a topic of hushed conversations in our small town. It wasn't long before the repercussions of his downfall began to surface in more visible ways. Ethan's family, once the epitome of wealth and status, found themselves grappling with a reality they were ill-prepared for. I watched from a distance, detached yet unavoidably connected to the unraveling of their world. It was a bitter outcome, one that stemmed from a seed of prejudice and arrogance they had planted themselves. A few weeks after the confrontation in the park, I received an unexpected visitor at our home. It was Ethan, looking disheveled, a far cry from the composed individual I once knew. "Alina, please, you have to listen to me," he pleaded as soon as I opened the door. I hesitated, the sight of him stirring a mix of emotions within me. "Ethan, why are you here?" "It's my family," he said, desperation lacing his words. "We're losing everything. My dad's career is in tatters, our assets are frozen, and now there's talk of selling the house. This is destroying us." His words should have stirred sympathy within me, but all I felt was a resounding echo of the injustice they had served me. "Ethan, your family brought this upon themselves," I said, my voice steady. "They judged and belittled us without a second thought. Your father's actions at the bank were his own doing. My mother simply chose not to ignore them." "But we never thought it would come to this," Ethan argued, his eyes pleading. "Surely there's something you or your mother can do. Talk to the board. Help clear his name." I felt a surge of incredulity. "You're asking us to help the man who insulted my family, who questioned our worth. Ethan, do you even hear yourself?" He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I thought maybe there's still something between us." I shook my head. The final remnants of what I felt for him dissipating in the face of his continued inability to understand the depth of his family's wrongdoing. "Ethan, there's nothing left between us," I said. "Your family's downfall is a result of their actions, not mine or my mother's. You need to face that reality." His shoulders slumped, the weight of the situation seemingly dawning on him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, a symbol of the consequences that befall those who let prejudice guide their actions. As I closed the door behind him, a sense of finality washed over me. The chapter of my life that involved Ethan and his family had closed. They were now facing the karmic debt of their actions, a harsh yet fitting testament to the age-old adage, "What goes around, comes around." It was a harsh lesson, not just for them, but for me as well. In the world we live in, the battles we fight are not just for success or love, but often for respect and equality. And sometimes those battles leave deep scars and lasting changes. In the weeks that followed, the transformation within me became more pronounced. The ordeal with Ethan and his family, while painful, served as a crucible, forging a new sense of self and purpose within me. I had witnessed firsthand the power of standing up against injustice, and the strength it takes to not be swayed by intimidation or societal pressures. My mother, Lorraine, became even more of a beacon in this newfound journey. Her unwavering support, coupled with her bold actions against Ethan's family, had not only defended our dignity, but also showcased the true extent of her influence and character. As the Sterling family grappled with their new reality, my mother and I found a renewed sense of connection in our small but resilient world. We often spent evenings discussing not just our future plans, but also the broader implications of what we had experienced. "One important lesson from all this, Alina," my mother said one evening, "is that true strength lies in integrity and the courage to stand up for what's right, even if it means standing alone." Her words resonated deeply with me. The journey had been tumultuous, but it had instilled in me a stronger sense of self-worth and an understanding of the impact of our actions on others. In this period of reflection, I also came to terms with my feelings towards Ethan. The love I had for him was overshadowed by the disappointment and disillusionment of his inaction. I realized that sometimes love is not enough, especially when it comes at the cost of one's self-respect. As I moved forward, I began to channel my energies into my career, taking cues from my mother's tenacity and business acumen. The challenges were many, but each obstacle served as a stepping stone, honing my skills and resolve. The story of Ethan and his family became a distant memory, a chapter in my life that had closed, leaving behind valuable lessons. In its place, a new chapter was beginning, one where I stood at the helm, guided by the principles that my mother and the recent experiences had ingrained in me. The transformation was not just internal. Our community's perception of us had shifted as well. The respect and admiration for my mother grew, and with it a newfound recognition of my own capabilities. We were no longer just the underdogs. We were symbols of resilience and integrity. As the chapter of vengeance and upheaval closed, a new chapter of growth and empowerment opened. It was a testament to the fact that even in the face of adversity and prejudice, one could emerge stronger, wiser, and more determined. The seasons changed, and with them, my perspective on life and its myriad challenges. The bitter experience with Ethan and his family had become a catalyst for a profound transformation, both in my personal and professional life. I had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, more resolute. My mother, Lorraine, continued to be my pillar of strength. Her decision to stand up against the Sterlings had not only defended our honor, but it also sent a powerful message to our community. We were not to be underestimated or belittled. Her actions spoke volumes about the values we stood for: integrity, respect, and resilience. As I advanced in my career, the lessons I had learned from that ordeal guided my decisions. I approached challenges with a newfound confidence, drawing upon the strength that the confrontation with Ethan's family had instilled in me. The respect I earned was not just for my professional capabilities, but also for the principles I upheld. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often thought about Ethan. I harbored no ill will towards him, but rather a sense of pity. He was a product of his environment, a prisoner of his family's archaic beliefs and expectations. I hoped that the upheaval his family faced would someday lead him to his own path of self-discovery and change. The Sterling family's fall from grace became a topic of the past, their plight a mere footnote in the town's history. They had paid a steep price for their prejudices and arrogance, a reminder to all about the impermanence of wealth and status when devoid of humanity and respect. As for me, the scars of that experience had healed, leaving behind a strength that became an integral part of my identity. I was no longer just Alina, the girl from a modest background. I was Alina, a woman of substance shaped by her experiences and the values instilled in her by a strong and courageous mother. In this journey, I had learned that true empowerment comes not from external validation, but from the recognition of one's own worth and the courage to stand up for it. It was a lesson that would guide me in the years to come, in both my personal and professional life. As I looked ahead, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. The road would undoubtedly have its share of obstacles, but I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the lessons from my past and the unwavering support of my mother. This was not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new, promising phase of my life. A life lived on my own terms, with dignity and pride.
My name's Carol, just a regular high school teacher with a love for old books and a quiet life. My world changed when I met David at the school fair. He was the main sponsor, the kind of guy who makes things happen without making a fuss about it. He had that quiet confidence and a smile that could light up the gloomiest day. It started with a thank you note I sent him for his generous contribution. He replied with invitation for coffee, saying it was the least he could do for the hard work we teachers were putting in. I remember walking into that coffee shop, my heart racing a bit, thinking, Carol, it's just coffee, not a moon landing. David was easy to talk to. We chatted about everything, from books to the best pizza in town. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Before we knew it, coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekends together. A few months in, he wanted me to meet his mother, Mrs. Winters. She's a bit old school, but she'll love you, he said. I was a bundle of nerves, wanting to make a good impression. I picked out my nicest dress and spent more time on my hair than I'd like to admit. The moment we walked into Mrs. Winters' living room, I felt her eyes on me like a hawk. So, you're the teacher David won't stop talking about, she said, her voice colder than I expected. I smiled, reached out for a handshake, but she just nodded, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Dinner was an experience. Mrs. Winters had this way of talking where every compliment sounded like she was doing you a favor. That's an interesting dress, dear. Vintage shop? She said, her eyebrow raised just so. I felt my cheeks burn, but I managed a small thank you. It's one of my favorites. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent hang in there, but the digs kept coming. A teacher, huh? Must be tough dealing with kids all day. Hope you don't bring that school discipline home. She chuckled, sipping her wine like it was the last one on earth. I really tried, to keep the conversation light, but it was like dancing on thin ice. David changed the topic, talked about his work, the weather, anything to steer away from the silent judgments being passed across the table. Fast forward a few months, and there I was, in a white dress, saying I do to the man who made it all worth it. The wedding was a blur of laughter, tears, and dancing. Mrs. Winters was there, of course, dressed to the nines and handing out opinions like candy. Lovely ceremony, though I'd have gone for real flowers. Not these. What are these, dear plastic? She said, eyeing the decorations. We moved into David's home soon after. It was a beautiful place, cozy and welcoming, except for the chill I felt whenever Mrs. Winters was around. David assured me it would get better, that she just needed time to get used to me. Moving into David's home felt like stepping into a new world, one where every corner held a memory of Mrs. Winters' reign. It wasn't long before I got introduced to her morning ritual, the infamous inspection. It started like clockwork every morning. The minute the clock struck 10, the front door would creak open, and in she'd walk like the queen of her castle. Mrs. Winters had this air about her, like she owned every inch of the place. Her first move was always to slip on those pristine white gloves, snapping them tight like she was about to perform surgery. "Morning, Carol dear," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sweetness that never reached her eyes. "Just here to help you keep the place up to David's standards." I'd force a smile, my hands clenching the dish towel a bit too tight. "Thanks, Mrs. Winters, but I've got it covered." She'd tut and shake her head, already walking towards the living room. "Nonsense, dear. You're new to this. It takes a keen eye to keep a house like this." And then it'd begin. She'd glide from room to room, that white handkerchief in her hand sweeping over every surface. It was like watching some twisted ballet, her movements precise, calculated. "You see here, dear," she'd say, holding up the handkerchief, now with a faint smudge of dust. "This is what I'm talking about. Can't have David living in a dustbin, can we?" I bit my tongue, the words, "It's not a dustbin," sitting at the tip, but I swallowed them down. David had asked me to play nice, and I was trying, really trying. The worst was the kitchen. That's my territory, I love cooking, always have. But she'd march in there like a general, inspecting the troops. "These pots aren't going to clean themselves, dear," she'd cluck, her fingers running over the rim of a saucepan I'd just washed. "It's clean, Mrs. Winters, I'd insist," my voice steady despite the storm inside. She'd hum, a sound that said, "I've heard better jokes." Well, we have different standards, I suppose. David's used to a certain way, you see. I'd nod, grinding my teeth so hard I was afraid I'd chip a tooth. It was the same every day. The living room, the bedrooms, even the bathrooms weren't spared. By the time she'd leave, I'd feel like a deflated balloon, all my energy sapped by her constant nitpicking. David would come home, all smiles and hugs, and I'd put on a brave face. "How was your day, love?" He'd ask, and I'd muster the brightest smile I could. "Oh, you know the usual." Mrs. Winters stopped by to give some helpful tips. I'd say, the word helpful taking all my acting skills to sound even remotely sincere. He'd frown, that wrinkle appearing between his brows. "I'll talk to her, Carol. She means, well, she just has her way, you know." I knew. Oh, how I knew. But what I didn't know was how long I could play this game, smiling through the inspections, biting back the words that screamed inside me. Saturday mornings should have been about lazy breakfasts and staying in pajamas till noon. But in our house, they were about one thing, the dreaded family dinner. It wasn't just any dinner. It was the weekly performance, with Mrs. Winters as the stern judge and me. Well, I was the hopeful contestant, always falling short. I'd be up at the crack of dawn, the kitchen my battlefield. Pots and pans clanged, the oven roared, and spices danced in the air. It was my attempt, week after week, to impress the unimpressible, Mrs. Winters. David, bless his heart, would stumble in half awake. "Need any help, love?" He'd ask, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I'd shoo him away with a spoon covered in sauce. "Go get ready. Your mom will be here any minute, and you know how she is about punctuality." He'd chuckle, a sound that held a mix of love and a hint of worry. "Yeah, if you're on time. You're late. That's her motto." The clock hadn't even struck 6 when we'd hear the sharp rap on the door. Showtime. Mrs. Winters and Mr. Winters would step in, him with his warm smile, her with her eyes already scanning for faults. "Smells good in here, Carol. What's on the menu today?" Mr. Winters would always start off with a compliment, his genuine kindness a stark contrast to his wife. Before I could answer, Mrs. Winters would chime in, her voice slicing through the warmth. "I hope it's not that casserole from last time. Remember, David, how you had that stomach ache?" David would wince, a silent plea in his eyes, begging me not to retort. "Mom, Carol's been working hard all day. Let's just enjoy the meal, yeah?" Dinner would be a tense affair. Mr. Winters would heap praises, his delicious "dear," and "you've outdone yourself, Carol," battling against Mrs. Winters's relentless critique. "This chicken is dry, dear. You really must learn to keep an eye on the oven," she'd say, pushing her barely touched plate away. I'd grit my teeth, forcing a polite, "I'll remember that for next time, Mrs. Winters." David would try to lighten the mood, his jokes a desperate attempt to bridge the widening gap at the table, but it was like throwing pebbles into a chasm, hoping for a bridge. And then, just when I thought I'd survived the worst, dessert would come, and with it, a fresh wave of critiques. "Is this pie supposed to be this? Crunchy?" Mrs. Winters would ask, the word crunchy sounding more like catastrophics. I'd swallow the lump in my throat, my reply a mix of wariness and defiance. "It's a family recipe, Mrs. Winters. It's always a hit." She'd raise an eyebrow, her gaze saying clearer than words, "Not in this family, dear." As they'd leave, Mr. Winters would give me a warm, encouraging hug, whispering, "Don't mind her, Carol. We all love your cooking." But Mrs. Winters's parting words would always be a reminder of the invisible scoreboard where I was always trailing. "Try harder next time, dear. A happy husband is a well-fed husband." The door would close behind them, and I'd stand there, a mix of frustration and defeat simmering inside. David would wrap his arms around me, his silence a mix of apology and solidarity. "It's just one night a week, love. We'll get through this," he'd whisper, his words a lifebuoy in the stormy seas of Saturday dinners. The news of the pregnancy should have been a moment of pure joy, a new chapter for David and me. But amidst the excitement, a shadow lingered, the thought of Mrs. Winters's reaction. David was over the moon, grinning ear to ear. "We're going to be parents. Carol, can you believe it?" he'd say, wrapping me in a hug so tight it felt like nothing could go wrong. But the first time Mrs. Winters dropped by after hearing the news, the air was thick with tension. I braced myself for her words, hoping maybe, just maybe, this new life might soften her. "Well, I do hope you've read up on parenting, Carol. It's not all cooing and cuddling, you know, she started, her tone as sharp as ever. I bit back a sigh, a fake smile plastered on. We're thrilled, Mrs. Winters. And yes, we're reading a lot, getting ready for the baby. She sniffed, peering at me like she was assessing if I was up to the task. Well, make sure you follow the right books. Some of these modern ideas are just nonsense. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent message of support. But as the weeks turned into months, the pressure didn't ease. Mrs. Winters's visits became a litany of advice and thinly veiled criticism. You're not eating enough greens, Carol. You want the baby to be healthy, don't you? She'd say, eyeing my plate like it was a crime scene. Or make sure you're not being too lazy. Exercise is important, but don't overdo it. You wouldn't want to harm the baby. It was a no-win situation. Do too little and I was careless. Do too much and I was reckless. The breaking point came one quiet afternoon. Mrs. Winters had just left. Her parting words, make sure the nursery is painted soon. You don't want the baby coming home to an unready house, ringing in my ears. David found me in the nursery, the paint samples scatter around, tears streaming down my face. Carol, what's wrong? Talk to me, love, he said, his voice laced with worry. I let it all out. The frustration, the hurt, the exhaustion. I can't do this anymore, David. It's like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home, your mother. It's just too much. David's face hardened, a rare sight. I'll talk to her, Carol. This ends now. You and the baby are my priority. And he did. That evening, I heard hushed, tense voices from the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. David was setting boundaries, fighting for our little family. The next day, Mrs. Winters's visits stopped. No more morning inspections, no more veiled insults. It was a relief, yet the silence felt heavy, charged with unsaid words and unresolved tensions. David was quieter too, his smiles not reaching his eyes. She's my mom, Carol. It hurts, but you and the baby come first. Always? I held him close, the future uncertain but our resolve clear. We were a team, and we'd face whatever came next, together. 7 years flew by since Lily, our little bundle of joy, came into our world. David was a doting father, his love for Lily shining in his every action. My father-in-law, a gentle soul, adored his granddaughter, his face lighting up with every giggle and every new word Lily spoke. But there was a chill that never thawed, a coldness that lingered in the air whenever Mrs. Winters was around. She kept her distance from Lily, her words as sharp as ever. Children should be seen and not heard, she'd say, dismissing Lily's cheerful chatter as nothing more than noise. Lily, with her big heart and innocent eyes, couldn't understand why her grandma wasn't like the ones in her storybooks. She'd try, in her own sweet way, to win over Mrs. Winters. Look, Grandma, I drew this for you, she'd say, holding up a crayon masterpiece. Mrs. Winters would barely glance at it, her voice devoid of warmth. That's nice, dear. Now go play, Grandma's busy. But Lily never lost her spirit. She found her passion early, cooking. The kitchen was her kingdom, her small hands skillfully mixing, stirring, and baking. Every weekend was a new adventure, her culinary creations a source of pride for us. Look, Daddy, I made cookies, she'd exclaim, her face beaming as she presented her latest work. David would scoop her up, his laughter filling the room. Chef Lily, you have outdone yourself! These are delicious! Even my father-in-law couldn't resist Lily's kitchen magic. My little chef, he'd say, his eyes twinkling as he took a bite, you'll be running your own restaurant in no time. Their words were a balm to Lily's soul, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she received from Mrs. Winters. But children have a resilience, a way of focusing on the love they receive, not the affection withheld. One evening, as Lily set the table, her latest culinary creation taking center stage, she looked up at me, her eyes serious. Mom, why doesn't Grandma like my cooking? Doesn't she like food? I knelt beside her, my heart aching with the innocence of her question. Sweetheart, Grandma, she's just different. But your cooking is wonderful, and Daddy and Grandpa and I, we love it. That's what matters, right? Lily nodded, her smile returning, the shadow of Mrs. Winters's indifference brushed aside by the love of those who mattered most. The Christmas invite from Mrs. Winters was a surprise, but Lily's excitement at the chance to showcase her cooking made us accept. Together, we baked gingerbread and apple pie, her little hands working diligently, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Grandma and everyone are gonna love these, right, Mom?" she'd ask, her confidence as warm as the oven. "Absolutely, sweetheart," I'd reassure her, though a part of me dreaded the unpredictable tides of Mrs. Winters's approval. Arriving at the bustling house, we placed our dishes on the grand Christmas table, an array of colors and smells that promised a feast. Lily's face was a picture of joy and anticipation as we mingled, catching up with relatives we hadn't seen in ages. But as we settled at the table, ready to share the meal and the joy of the season, Lily's excitement turned to confusion, then distress. "Mom, where's our gingerbread and pie?" she whispered, her small voice trembling. I scanned the table, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Our dishes were missing. Mrs. Winters at the head of the table was holding court, her laughter ringing out clear and sharp. I approached her, my voice firm but polite. "Mrs. Winters, the dishes Lily and I brought, where are they?" Her laughter cut through the festive hum, cold and piercing. "Oh, those." "I tossed them out, dear. We can't risk serving just anything to our guests, can we?" The room fell silent, the air heavy with shock and disbelief. Lily's eyes filled with tears, her dream of sharing her love through her cooking dashed in an instant. "But I made them for everyone. I worked so hard," she managed to say, her voice a fragile whisper against the weight of her grandmother's harsh words. Mrs. Winters shrugged, her eyes void of any warmth. "Well, dear, not everything made with love is fit for the table. Better safe than sorry." That was the last straw. David, who had always been the bridge between his mother and our family, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor loudly. "Mom, that's cruel. How could you?" he said, his voice steady, but loaded with an anger I had rarely seen in him. Lily poured her heart into those dishes. She wanted to share something special, and you just threw it away like it was nothing. Mrs. Winters's smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise. This was not the mild-mannered son she was used to. "David, I was just—" "No, Mom, you went too far. Disrespecting Carol is one thing, but hurting Lily, your own granddaughter, that's something I can't and won't forgive." He interrupted, his disappointment and anger clear and unwavering. The room was still, the festive air replaced by a tense silence. Mrs. Winters sat there, the impact of David's words hitting her. She had expected compliance, maybe a few whispered complaints, but not this. Not her usually gentle son standing up to her, defending his family with such resolve. The air was thick with tension as we left Mrs. Winters's house, the festive lights mocking us with their cheer. The sound of Lily's quiet sobs was louder than the Christmas carols that played in the background. David's hand was firm on my shoulder, a silent pillar of strength. As we reached the door, Mrs. Winters's voice broke through the heavy silence, her tone desperate, a stark contrast to the cold disdain she'd shown earlier. "Please don't go. I'm sorry," she stammered, her eyes wet with tears that seemed out of place on her stern face. David stopped, turning back to face his mother. The room held its breath. "Sorry. Now you're sorry." His voice was low, but it cut through the room, sharp and clear. "You humiliated your own granddaughter, Mom. You broke her heart. There's no sorry that can fix that." Mrs. Winters's sobs grew louder, her composure shattered, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the cracks too deep to mend. In the tense silence that followed, Mr. Winters stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "I can't sit here and pretend this is okay, Martha." Not this time. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the burden of a decision long overdue. The room felt colder, the festive warmth snuffed out by a single act of unkindness. One by one, the guests stood up, their faces somber, their goodbyes muted and brief. The festive gathering was unraveling, the threads of family and friendship coming undone. As the last guest left, the door closing with a soft click, the magnitude of what had happened settled in the room. Mrs. Winters sat alone at the table, her sobs the only sound in the house that moments ago was filled with laughter and chatter. Outside, the cold air bit at our cheeks, a stark reminder of the warmth we'd left behind. David's arm was around Lily, her small body leaning into his for comfort. We walked in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on us. Back home, as we sat in the living room, the Christmas tree lights twinkling softly, a sense of peace settled over us. It was a fragile peace, one born from the chaos of the night, but it was ours. Lily, nestled between us, her tears dried, but the hurt still fresh in her eyes, looked up and whispered, "Are we okay, Mom, Dad?" David hugged her closer, a silent vow in his embrace. "We're more than okay, sweetheart. We're together, and that's all that matters." And in that moment, as we held each other, the trials of the night receded, leaving behind a simple truth. Family wasn't just about shared blood or shared names. It was about shared love, shared pain, and the shared resolve to stand together when the world seemed to crumble around us. The fallout from that chaotic Christmas dinner rippled through our family like a shockwave. The house felt different, quieter, the air still tinged with the remnants of that night's revelations. David was somber, his usual cheer dimmed by the events that had unfolded. "I'm sorry, Carol," he said one evening as we sat in the living room, the only sound the ticking of the clock. "I should have stood up for you and Lily sooner. I let it go on for too long." I reached for his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against mine. "You did what you thought was best, David. We both did. But now we know better. We move forward, together." He nodded, the lines on his face softening. But the true shock came the next day when Mr. Winters showed up at our doorstep, his eyes weary, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David opened the door wider, concern etched on his face. "Of course, Dad. Is everything okay?" Mr. Winters took a seat, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas," he started, his voice trailing off. We waited, the tension thick in the air. Finally he looked up, his eyes meeting ours. "I can't believe Martha could be so cruel, so heartless to her own granddaughter. I never imagined she could go that far." David shifted in his seat, the weight of his father's words heavy on his shoulders. "Dad, Mr. Winters raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No, David, I should have seen it, should have done something sooner. But I didn't, and now I'm thinking about a divorce." The word hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Divorce wasn't a word thrown around lightly in our family, and coming from Mr. Winters, it was a bombshell. "Divorce!" David echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. Mr. Winters nodded, a resolute look on his face. "I can't be with someone who shows such cruelty, not just to Carol and Lily, but to her own family. I've turned a blind eye for too long, hoping things would change. But after what happened at Christmas, I can't ignore it anymore." We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The decision was monumental, not just for Mr. Winters, but for all of us. It was a line in the sand, a declaration that enough was enough. "Whatever you decide, Dad, we're here for you," David said, his voice firm. "You've always been there for us, and that won't change." Mr. Winters smiled, a weary, sad smile. "Thank you, son. That means more than you know." In the days that followed, our family found a new rhythm, a new way of being. The shadows of the past lingered, but so did the promise of a fresh start, a chance to build something stronger and more resilient from the broken pieces. Lily's laughter returned, filling the house with a warmth that pushed back the darkness. And as we sat together, the three of us with Mr. Winters now a more frequent visitor, I realized that family wasn't about tolerating the intolerable. It was about standing up for each other, about choosing love and respect over blood and tradition. In the quiet moments, when the night wrapped the world in its embrace, I'd look at my little family and know that, despite the storms we'd weathered, we were stronger together. And no amount of cruelty or coldness could ever change that.